The boy stood at the edge of the yard like he'd been planted there, one hand raised high above his head, the other clutching a toy motorcycle so worn the paint had rubbed off the handlebars. His name was Marcus Dubois, Little Man, to his grandmother, though he was barely 4 feet tall and 7 years old, and he waved at every motorcycle that passed the shotgun house on Cypress Road. Most of them never noticed. Most of them were just blurs of chrome and thunder, gone before he could count to 3. But today was different. Today wasn't one motorcycle or two. Today was a river. They came around the bend in formation, 30 bikes deep, engines rumbling low and steady like summer thunder rolling in from the Gulf. The chrome caught the late October sun and threw it back in shards of light, and Marcus waved so hard his whole body shook with the effort. "They see me, ma mère," he shouted toward the porch. "They see me." Odette Dubois sat in her rocking chair with a glass of sweet tea, sweating in her hand, watching her grandson bounce on his heels like a pogo stick. She was 68 years old, and her heart, the physical one, the one the doctors kept warning her about, was tired. But the other heart, the one that had raised 3 children and buried one and now poured everything it had left into this boy, that heart was full to bursting. "I see you seeing them, baby," she called back. "Wave nice now." The convoy slowed as it passed. Not much, just a gear down, a moment's hesitation, but enough that Marcus noticed. Enough that the rider at the front, a silver-haired woman with sergeant patches on her cut, turned her head and looked right at him. She didn't wave back. She did something better. She smiled. Marcus's whole face split into a grin so wide Odette could see it from 30 feet away. He clutched the toy motorcycle to his chest and watched the convoy disappear around the next bend, engines fading until the only sound was the wind in the cypress trees and the distant complaint of a heron in the bayou. "Mimere," Marcus said, running to the porch with the boundless energy of children everywhere. "Did you see? She looked at me. The lady on the big bike. She looked right at me. I saw, baby. You think they'll come back?" Odette pulled him onto her lap, ignoring the twinge in her chest that came with every exertion now. The doctors had given her pills, a whole pharmacy of pills, lined up on her nightstand like soldiers, and told her to rest. But rest was a luxury for people who didn't have 7-year-olds to raise and social workers to satisfy and sons who showed up after 15 years wanting things they hadn't earned. "I don't know, little man," she said honestly. "Bikers are traveling people. They go where the road takes them. But maybe the road will take them back here." He held up the toy motorcycle, the one his mother had given him 2 weeks before she died. "Maybe if I wait long enough." Odette held him tighter and didn't answer. She'd learned a long time ago not to promise things she couldn't deliver. Life had taught her that lesson the hard way, first with her husband, who'd promised to come home from the oil rig and hadn't, then with her daughter, Marlene, who'd promised to get clean and hadn't, and now with Curtis, her only living child, who'd promised to stay away and suddenly wasn't. The letter had arrived 3 days ago. Curtis was coming to visit. Curtis wanted to discuss arrangements for Marcus. Curtis had heard about Odette's heart and thought maybe, just maybe, it was time to consider alternatives. She knew what that meant. She'd seen the way Curtis looked at things, calculating, weighing, measuring their value against his needs. He'd looked at his father's watch that way the day after the funeral. He'd looked at Marlene's settlement money that way, when she was too high to notice half of it disappearing. And now he wanted to look at Marcus. "Mimere?" Marcus's voice pulled her back. "You're squeezing too tight." "Sorry, baby." She loosened her grip. "Just loving on you." "Can I go wait by the road, in case they come back?" "You can wait on the porch where I can see you. And you come in when I call for supper. Here?" "Yes, ma'am." He scrambled down and took up his post at the porch railing, toy motorcycle in hand, eyes fixed on the bend in the road where the convoy had disappeared. Odette watched him for a long moment, this boy who'd lost everything and still believed good things could come around the bend if you waited long enough. She couldn't lose him. She wouldn't. But her heart was tired, and Curtis was coming, and the social worker had left another message about the home inspection next week, and somewhere out there, Marlene's life insurance policy was sitting in a trust that would pay out to Marcus's guardian when he turned 18, $200,000. That's what Curtis saw when he looked at her grandson. Odette pulled herself out of the rocking chair, one hand pressed against her chest, and went inside to start supper. The pills were on the nightstand where she'd left them. She'd take them after she ate. She'd rest when Marcus was asleep. She'd be strong enough, whole enough, present enough to keep him safe. She had to be. On the porch, Marcus kept his vigil, waving at every car that passed, waiting for thunder that might never come. But 3 miles down the road, a convoy had pulled into the parking lot of the Bayou Brotherhood's clubhouse, and a silver-haired woman named Charlotte Thibodeau was telling her brothers and sisters about a little boy on Cypress Road who waved like his life depended on it. "We should go back," she said. "Tomorrow. See what his story is." The club president, a bear of a man named Boudreaux, raised an eyebrow. "We got the charity run in Baton Rouge on Sunday, Mama Bear. You want to add a detour for a kid who waved at us?" Charlotte pulled out her phone and showed him the photograph she'd taken. Without thinking, a blur of a boy in a Too Big Saints jersey, arm stretched toward the sky, frozen in the middle of a wave that looked like prayer. "Look at him," she said. "Tell me that's not a kid who needs somebody to wave back." Boudreaux looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he finished his beer and stood up. "Tomorrow," he said. "First thing, we go see about this boy." Charlotte smiled and tucked the phone away, next to the memorial patch she wore for her grandson, the one who'd been 6 years old when the truck ran the red light, the one who'd waved at her every morning from the school bus window until the morning he didn't. Some waves you couldn't return in time, but some waves, maybe, you could. Curtis Dubois sat in the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly in Thibodaux, staring at his phone and trying to remember when his life had gotten so small. The text from Deshawn was the third one this week. "You got till Friday. After that, we talked to your boss. The loan had been $5,000, borrowed 8 months ago, when Curtis thought the promotion was coming and the cards would finally stop being maxed out. The promotion hadn't come. The cards had gotten worse, and now he owed $12,000 to a man who knew where he worked and wasn't above showing up there. He pulled up the photograph of Marcus on his phone, the one Marlene had sent him 3 years ago, back when she was still pretending she had things under control. The boy looked like her. Same wide eyes, same hopeful smile. Curtis had never met him in person, had never wanted to. But $200,000 was $200,000. The life insurance policy had been his idea, actually. He'd convinced Marlene to take it out when Marcus was born, told her it was the responsible thing to do. He'd even paid the first year's premiums, back when he thought it might be useful someday. He just hadn't expected someday to come so fast. Curtis started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward Cypress Road. He'd called ahead this time, told Mama he was coming to check on things. She'd been cold on the phone. She'd always been cold with him, even before he'd taken Daddy's watch. But she hadn't said no. She couldn't say no. She was 68 years old with a bad heart and a 7-year-old to raise, and Curtis was her only surviving child. That had to count for something, even if he wasn't sure what. The next morning, Marcus was on the porch before the sun had fully cleared the tree line. He'd barely slept. Every time he'd closed his eyes, he'd seen the convoy, the chrome, the thunder, the silver-haired woman who'd smiled at him like she meant it. Mimere had let him bring the toy motorcycle to bed, and he'd held it all night, dreaming of engines. "They'll come," he told Ranger, the old hound dog who lived under the porch and came out for scraps and scratches. "I know they will." Ranger thumped his tail once, non-committal, and went back to sleep. By 9 o'clock, Marcus had waved at 14 cars, 2 pickup trucks, and a tractor pulling a trailer full of sugarcane. None of them had waved back. By 10 o'clock, Mimere had called him inside twice for water, and once to make sure he'd eaten the biscuit she'd left on the kitchen table. By 11 o'clock, Marcus was starting to think maybe Mimere had been right. Maybe bikers were traveling people who went where the road took them, and the road didn't take them back to little boys on Cypress Road. And then he heard it. Low at first, like the rumble of a storm building behind the horizon. Then louder, closer, resolving into the distinct rhythm of motorcycle engines. Not one, not two, but many, rolling in formation like they had the day before. Marcus scrambled to his feet so fast he nearly fell off the porch. He grabbed the railing with one hand and raised the other high above his head, waving with everything he had. "Mimere! Mimere! They came back!" Odette appeared in the doorway, dish towel in her hands, her face a mixture of surprise and something that might have been fear. She watched the convoy approach, counting bikes, 12 this time, not 30. And when they slowed and turned into her driveway, she set down the towel and stepped onto the porch beside her grandson. "Marcus, baby, come stand by me." "But Mère, by me? Now?" He obeyed, bouncing on his heels as the bikes pulled in and the engines died one by one. The silver-haired woman was at the front again, and when she dismounted and pulled off her helmet, Marcus saw that she had kind eyes and laugh lines and a patch on her chest that showed a little boy on a bicycle. "Morning," the woman said, walking toward the porch with her hands visible and her posture relaxed, the way you approached a stray dog that might bolt. "My name's Charlotte Thibodeau. These are my brothers and sisters from the Bayou Brotherhood." Odette's hand found Marcus's shoulder and held tight. "Can I help you with something?" "We were passing through yesterday. Saw your boy here waving at us like he was trying to flag down a rescue plane." Charlotte's smile was warm but careful. "I couldn't stop thinking about him. Thought we'd come back and say hello proper." Marcus broke free of his grandmother's grip and launched himself off the porch, landing in front of Charlotte with his toy motorcycle raised like an offering. "I wave at all the bikes," he said breathlessly, "but you're the first ones who ever came back. How come you came back? Do you live near here? What kind of motorcycle is that? Can I sit on it?" "Marcus!" Odette's voice was sharp. "Mind your manners." "It's all right." Charlotte crouched down to Marcus's eye level, and something softened in her face, a grief that had learned to wear a smile. "That's a fine motorcycle you got there. What's his name?" "Thunder." Marcus held it out for her to see. "My mama gave it to me, before she went to heaven." Charlotte's eyes flickered up to Odette, then back to Marcus. "That's a real good name. My grandson had a motorcycle too, a red one." "What happened to it?" "He took it with him." Charlotte's voice stayed steady, but Odette saw the way her hand trembled when she reached out to touch the toy. To heaven. Marcus considered this with the gravity of a child who understood heaven better than most. Maybe they're friends now. Thunder and the red one. Maybe they are. Odette came down the porch steps, her hand pressed against her chest in that unconscious gesture she'd developed since the diagnosis. "I appreciate you coming by. Marcus doesn't get many visitors. No family nearby?" The question was casual, but Odette heard the real question underneath. "His mama was my daughter, passed 8 months ago. It's just us now. I'm sorry for your loss." Charlotte straightened up and looked at Odette. Really looked, the way someone did when they were trying to see past the surface. "You doing okay? You look tired, if you don't mind me saying." "I mind a little." No, but there was no heat in it. Odette was too tired for heat. "It's nothing. Just old age catching up." "Mère has a bad heart," Marcus said helpfully. "She takes pills that look like candy but taste like dirt. I tried one once." "Marcus!" Charlotte laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, and some of the other riders chuckled too. The tension that had been building since they'd pulled into the driveway eased slightly. "Listen," Charlotte said, "we don't mean to intrude. We just—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes you see something that sticks with you. That picture of your boy waving at us. It reminded me of someone I lost. I wanted to make sure he was okay." "He's okay." Odette's voice softened. "He's better than okay. He's the best thing that ever happened to me." "I can see that." Charlotte reached into her cut and pulled out a card. "This has my number on it. If you ever need anything, a hand with yard work, someone to talk to, anything at all, you call. We look out for our own around here." "We're not your own." "You waved at us." Charlotte smiled. "That makes you ours." She turned back toward her bike, and the other riders began mounting up. Marcus ran after her, tugging at her sleeve. "Will you come back again, please?" Charlotte looked at Odette, asking permission with her eyes. Odette hesitated. She could feel herself hesitating, all the old reflexes kicking in, the pride that had kept her standing when everything else fell down, and then she nodded. "Sunday," Charlotte said. "We've got a charity run in Baton Rouge, but we'll stop by on the way back. That work for you, little man?" Marcus's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Yes, ma'am. I'll be right here. I'll wave the whole time you're coming." The bikes roared to life, and Marcus stood in the driveway waving until they disappeared around the bend, just like yesterday, except this time they'd promised to return. Odette watched from the porch, the card clutched in her hand, and tried to ignore the car she'd just noticed parked at the end of the road, A blue sedan with Texas plates that hadn't been there an hour ago. Curtis was here. She could see him through the windshield, watching the bikers leave, watching Marcus wave, watching everything with those calculating eyes she'd hoped to never see again. She tucked Charlotte's card into her apron pocket and went inside to put on a pot of coffee. Some battles you couldn't avoid, but maybe this time she wouldn't have to fight alone. Curtis knocked on the door at noon, wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes and carrying a store-bought pie like a peace offering. "Hey, Mama," he said. "Missed you." Odette looked at her son, 43 years old, soft around the middle, something desperate lurking behind the practiced charm, and felt her heart clench in a way that had nothing to do with the diagnosis. "Curtis," she said, "come in. We need to talk about why you're really here." She stepped aside to let him pass, one hand pressed against her chest, the other touching the card in her apron pocket like a promise she was just beginning to understand. Curtis ate 2 slices of pie and made small talk for an hour before he got to the point. He asked about her health. He asked about the house. He asked about Marcus, though he'd barely looked at the boy since he'd arrived, just a quick glance, an assessment, the same way he'd looked at the furniture. Marcus had retreated to his room after Odette introduced them, clutching Thunder to his chest, his eyes wide and wary, in a way that made Odette's chest ache. The boy had his mother's instincts. He knew when something was wrong. "I've been thinking," Curtis said, setting down his fork, "about your situation here. A woman your age, with your health problems, trying to raise a child alone. It's a lot, Mama." "I manage? Do you?" His voice was soft, concerned, the voice he'd used when he was 15 and wanted the car keys, when he was 20 and wanted her to co-sign a loan, when he was 30 and wanted her to lie to the police about where he'd been, the night his father's watch disappeared from the safe. "The house needs work. You're behind on the property taxes. Don't look at me like that. It's public record. And the social worker's coming next week for an inspection. What happens if she doesn't like what she sees?" Odette's hands tightened on her coffee cup. "How do you know about the social worker?" "I made some calls." Curtis shrugged, casual, like he hadn't just admitted to investigating his own mother. "I'm family. I have a right to know what's happening with my nephew. You haven't seen that boy in 7 years. You didn't come to his mother's funeral." "I was in a bad place." Something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe, or an imitation of it. "I'm trying to do better now. That's why I'm here, to help." "You're here for the money." The words hung in the air between them. Curtis's mask slipped just for a moment, and Odette saw the calculation underneath, the cold arithmetic of a man who'd learned to measure everything by what it could give him. "Marlene's life insurance," she continued, "the trust that pays out when Marcus turns 18, $200,000, that's what you want." "I want what's best for the boy." "You want what's best for you, same as always." Curtis stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't take care of him, Mama. Look at you. You can barely take care of yourself. You think a judge is going to let a 68-year-old woman with a failing heart keep custody of a 7-year-old? You think that social worker is going to sign off on this house with the porch falling in and the water heater that's older than I am? Get out." "I've already talked to a lawyer." His voice was harder now, the charm stripped away. "I can file for emergency guardianship based on your medical condition. I can have Marcus in my custody by the end of the week." Odette stood too, her heart pounding in her chest. Pounding wrong, she knew that rhythm, the flutter that meant the pills weren't enough. "Over my dead body. That's what I'm counting on." The words landed like a blow. Odette stared at her son, her child, the baby she'd held and fed and raised, and saw a stranger looking back at her. A stranger who'd calculated the odds and decided she was worth more dead than alive. "Get out of my house." "Mama, get out." She didn't feel herself fall. One moment she was standing, the next she was on the floor, the linoleum cold against her cheek, her chest tight and wrong, and refusing to expand the way it should. She heard Curtis swearing, heard him fumbling for his phone, heard him telling someone, 911, she realized distantly, that his mother had collapsed, that she had a heart condition, that he was the only family here. And then she heard Marcus. "Ma mère, ma mère!" Small hands on her face, small voice breaking with fear. She tried to speak, tried to tell him she was okay, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was reach for him, her fingers brushing his cheek, her eyes trying to say everything her mouth couldn't. "I love you. I'm sorry. Don't let him take you." The paramedics arrived 12 minutes later. They loaded Odette onto a stretcher while Curtis stood in the doorway, his arm around Marcus's shoulders in a pantomime of comfort. "I'm his uncle," he told the EMT. "I'll take care of him while she's in the hospital." Marcus tried to pull away. "I want to go with Mamere." "You can't, buddy. She needs doctors right now." Curtis's grip tightened. "I'll take good care of you, I promise." The last thing Odette saw before they closed the ambulance doors was her grandson's face, pale, terrified, staring after her with the toy motorcycle clutched to his chest. "Call Charlotte," she tried to say. "The card. Call Charlotte." But the words never came, and the doors closed, and the siren started, and Marcus was left standing in the driveway with a man he'd met 3 hours ago. Sunday morning, the Bayou Brotherhood rolled up to the shotgun house on Cypress Road and found it empty. No boy on the porch, no grandmother in the rocking chair, just Ranger the old hound dog whining under the steps, and a for sale sign that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Charlotte killed her engine and walked to the porch, her boots heavy on the sagging boards. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house looked the same, furniture in place, dishes in the sink, but something was wrong. She could feel it the way she'd felt it the day she'd gotten the call about her grandson. "Charlotte," Boudreaux's voice from outside, "you need to see this." She found him at the mailbox, holding a folded piece of paper, a note written in a child's handwriting so shaky it was almost illegible. The bikers came back. "Mamere is sick. Uncle Curtis took me. I don't want to go. Please help." Below that, a drawing. A stick figure boy waving at a row of motorcycles, tears streaming down his round face. Charlotte stared at the note, her hands trembling. She thought about her grandson, about the school bus, about all the waves she'd never been able to return. "Find out where they took her," she said. "Find out where he's taking the boy." "Charlotte, now." Her voice cracked. "We find them now." Boudreaux made calls. The other riders spread out, asking neighbors, checking the hospital, tracking down anyone who might have seen something. By noon, they had answers. Odette was in St. Anne's Hospital in Houma, stable but sedated. Curtis had filed for emergency guardianship Saturday afternoon, citing his mother's incapacitating medical episode and his status as Marcus's only living relative. A hearing was scheduled for Tuesday morning, 48 hours away. Marcus was in a motel off the interstate, 20 miles from the only home he'd ever known, with an uncle he didn't trust and a future that was slipping away one legal document at a time. Charlotte sat in the hospital parking lot, staring at the brick facade of St. Anne's, trying to figure out what to do. "We're not lawyers," Boudreaux said quietly. "We can't stop a custody hearing. No, but we can make sure that boy isn't alone when it happens." Charlotte pulled out her phone. "I know people. Social workers, family court advocates, a lawyer in New Orleans who handles cases like this pro bono. We've got 48 hours to build a case for why Curtis Dubois shouldn't get anywhere near that child. And if it's not enough?" Charlotte thought about Marcus, about the note he'd left, about the drawing of a boy waving at motorcycles with tears on his face. She thought about her grandson, about the red toy motorcycle he'd taken to heaven, about all the things she'd never been able to protect him from. "Then we find another way." She opened her door. "But first, I'm going to go see Odette, and I'm going to tell her she's not fighting this alone." Inside the hospital, Odette lay in a narrow bed, monitors beeping, an IV dripping steadily into her arm. She was awake but barely, the sedatives pulling at her, trying to drag her back under. Charlotte pulled a chair close and took her hand. "Mrs. Dubois, it's Charlotte Thibodeau from the motorcycle club." Odette's eyes focused slowly. "Marcus? We're going to find him. We're going to help you. Curtis, he wants—" She struggled to form the words. "The money. Insurance. He doesn't care about Marcus. He just wants—" "I know." Charlotte squeezed her hand. "I know. But you listen to me. That boy waved at us like his life depended on it, and maybe it did. We don't let that go unanswered. We don't let him disappear." Tears leaked from the corners of Odette's eyes, trailing down into her gray hair. "I can't," she whispered. "My heart. I can't fight. You don't have to fight alone anymore." Charlotte reached into her pocket and pulled out the card she'd given Odette 2 days ago, the one Odette had left on the kitchen counter when the paramedics came. You gave this back without meaning to, but the offer still stands. We look out for our own. Odette's fingers closed around the card, weak but deliberate. Help him, she said. Please, whatever it takes, help my boy. Charlotte stood, the card pressed between their hands like a vow. I will, she said. I promise. She walked out of the hospital room and found Boudreau waiting in the hallway, phone in hand. I've got a lawyer on the line, he said, and the social worker who's supposed to do the home inspection tomorrow. She's willing to testify about the condition of Curtis's motel room versus the house on Cypress Road. What about Marcus? Working on it. There's a child advocacy organization in Baton Rouge. They can request an emergency guardian ad litem to represent his interests at the hearing. Charlotte nodded, her jaw tight. Tuesday morning, we make sure every person in that courtroom knows exactly who Curtis Dubois is and what he really wants. And if the judge rules in his favor anyway? Charlotte thought about the note in her pocket, the stick-figure boy with tears on his face, the wave that had started everything. Then, we figure out what comes next. She started walking toward the exit. But that boy is not going to grow up thinking nobody came back for him. Not this time. Not if I have anything to say about it. Behind her, the Bayou Brotherhood fell into step, boots echoing in the hospital corridor. 48 hours, one hearing, one chance to keep a promise. Charlotte pulled out her phone and started making calls. Tuesday morning broke gray and humid over Terrebonne Parish, the kind of weather that pressed down on everything like a hand. The family courtroom on the second floor of the parish courthouse was smaller than Charlotte expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights, a judge's bench that looked like it had seen 50 years, of broken families and hard decisions. She sat in the back row with Boudreau and 6 other Bayou Brotherhood members, their cuts left on their bikes out of respect for the court. They weren't alone. Word had spread through the Veterans Network the way it always did, quietly, urgently. One call leading to another until the courtroom's gallery was filled with people who'd never met Marcus Dubois, but had heard his story and decided it mattered. Retired social workers, foster parents, a child psychologist from Tulane who'd driven 2 hours to testify about the effects of trauma on displaced children. And in the front row, in a wheelchair, she'd had to argue her way out of the hospital to use, sat Odette Dubois. She was pale and exhausted, an oxygen tube trailing from her nose, but her eyes were sharp. When Charlotte had told her about the hearing, about the people who'd shown up, about the case they'd built in 48 hours, Odette had pulled herself upright in her hospital bed and said 3 words. I'll be there. The doctors had objected. Charlotte had overruled them. Curtis sat at the petitioner's table with a lawyer he'd hired with money. Charlotte suspected he didn't actually have. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the crowd he hadn't expected. The practiced confidence from Saturday was gone, replaced by something raw. Desperation, maybe, or the dawning realization that this wasn't going to be as easy as he'd planned. Marcus wasn't in the courtroom. He was in a supervised waiting room down the hall with Sandra Thibodeau, Charlotte's daughter-in-law, who'd volunteered to stay with him so he wouldn't have to hear strangers argue about his future. Charlotte had met with him briefly that morning, just long enough to show him the photograph she'd taken, the one of him waving at the convoy. You came back, he'd said, clutching thunder to his chest. I told you we would. Is Mère okay? She's here, baby. She's fighting for you. He'd cried then, and Charlotte had held him, and she'd made a promise to herself that she would keep the promise she'd made to him. The judge entered, a black woman in her 60s named Honorable Diane Broussard, known throughout the parish for her no-nonsense approach and her low tolerance for adults who used children as bargaining chips. Charlotte had done her research. Broussard had 3 grandchildren of her own and a reputation for seeing through bullshit. We're here on an emergency petition for guardianship, Judge Broussard said, settling into her chair. Curtis Dubois petitioning for custody of his nephew, Marcus Dubois, currently in the care of his grandmother, Odette Dubois. She looked up from her papers. I see we have quite a crowd this morning. Curtis's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client is the child's only living male relative. Given Mrs. Dubois' recent medical episode and ongoing health concerns, he's prepared to provide a stable home for his nephew. And where is this stable home exactly? The lawyer hesitated. My client is currently residing in Texas, Your Honor. He intends to relocate Marcus to his residence in Houston. Houston? Judge Broussard made a note. And what is Mr. Dubois' current employment situation? Another hesitation. He's between positions at the moment, but, Your Honor. A woman rose from the front row, Camille Fontenot, the pro bono family lawyer Charlotte had called Sunday night. She was small, sharp-featured, with the coiled energy of someone who'd spent 20 years fighting battles most people didn't know existed. I'm representing the interests of Odette Dubois, and, with the court's permission, would like to present evidence relevant to this petition. Proceed. Camille walked to the front of the courtroom, a folder in her hand. Your Honor, Mr. Dubois claims to be acting in the best interests of his nephew, but our investigation suggests otherwise. She opened the folder and pulled out a document. This is a financial background check on Curtis Dubois, conducted over the past 48 hours. Mr. Dubois currently owes $12,000 to a private lender in Houston, a lender with known connections to criminal enterprises. He's 3 months behind on rent, his car is being repossessed, and he has no stable income. Curtis's face went white. His lawyer started to object, but Judge Broussard held up a hand. Continue. More importantly, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Dubois' interest in his nephew is primarily financial. Camille pulled out another document. Marcus Dubois is the beneficiary of a $200,000 life insurance policy taken out by his mother. The payout is held in trust until Marcus turns 18, at which point it transfers to his legal guardian. That's speculation, Curtis's lawyer said. There's no evidence? Actually, there is. Camille handed a paper to the bailiff. This is a text message exchange between Mr. Dubois and the private lender I mentioned. In it, Mr. Dubois explicitly references the insurance money as a means of repaying his debt. He states, and I quote, "Give me 3 months. Once I get custody of the kid, we're golden." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Broussard banged her gavel once, her expression hard. Mr. Dubois, is this accurate? Curtis looked at his lawyer, who looked at the documents, who looked at the judge, with the expression of a man realizing he'd been lied to by his own client. Your Honor, I need a moment to confer with my client. You've had your moment. Judge Broussard's voice was ice. Mr. Dubois, I'm asking you directly. Did you file this petition because you genuinely want to care for your nephew, or because you want access to his inheritance? Curtis stood, his hands shaking. It's not. You don't understand. I owe people money, bad people. If I don't pay them back, they'll... He stopped, realizing what he was admitting. I thought maybe, if I had custody, I could take out a loan against the trust, just until I got back on my feet. You thought you could use a 7-year-old child as collateral for your gambling debts. It's not gambling, it's... Curtis's voice cracked. I made some bad investments. I was trying to fix things. I never meant to hurt Marcus. I needed a way out. Odette spoke for the first time, her voice thin but steady from her wheelchair. You never meant to hurt him, but you were willing to take him from the only home he's ever known. You were willing to let me die worrying about what would happen to him. Tears streamed down her face. You're my son. I raised you. How did I raise someone who could do this? Curtis looked at his mother, and for a moment, Charlotte saw something crack in him, the desperate facade falling away to reveal something smaller, sadder, more broken than calculating. I'm sorry, Mama, he said quietly. I'm sorry. Judge Broussard let the silence hold for a long moment. Then she straightened the papers in front of her. Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Dubois, your petition for emergency guardianship is denied. Based on the evidence presented, I'm also issuing a protective order, preventing you from having unsupervised contact with Marcus Dubois until further notice. Curtis slumped in his chair. However, the judge's voice softened slightly. You clearly need help, Mr. Dubois. Help that has nothing to do with your nephew's insurance policy. I'm ordering you to complete a financial counseling program and a mental health evaluation before any future custody petitions will be considered. She looked at him over her glasses. You're not a monster. You're a man who made bad choices and ran out of good options. But that child is not your option. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Dubois. Judge Broussard turned to Odette. Your health situation is a legitimate concern. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Odette gripped the arms of her wheelchair. I know, Your Honor, but I'm all that boy has. Actually, that's not entirely true. The judge looked at the gallery, at Charlotte, at the Bayou Brotherhood, at the social workers and advocates who'd shown up for a child they'd never met. It seems Marcus has quite a few people willing to look out for him. She made a note on her papers. I'm ordering a formal care plan to be developed in conjunction with Child Protective Services. Mrs. Dubois, you'll remain Marcus's legal guardian, but we're going to establish a support network, regular check-ins, respite care options, emergency contacts, to ensure that if something happens to you, Marcus doesn't fall through the cracks. She looked at Charlotte. I understand you're the one who organized all these people, Ms. Thibodeau. Charlotte stood. Yes, Your Honor. Would you be willing to serve as a registered emergency contact for Marcus? Someone CPS can call if Mrs. Dubois needs help? Charlotte thought about her grandson, about the red motorcycle, about the waves she'd never been able to return. She thought about Marcus in the waiting room down the hall, clutching his toy and waiting to find out if he'd ever see his grandmother again. Yes, Your Honor, I would. Then we're adjourned. Mrs. Dubois, go see your grandson. I imagine he's been waiting long enough. The bailiff opened the side door, and Marcus appeared, Sandra Thibodeau's hand on his shoulder. He saw Odette in her wheelchair and broke into a run, launching himself into her arms with a force that made the oxygen tube swing. Mère, you came. I told you I would, baby. Odette held him tight, her frail arms wrapped around him, her face buried in his hair. I told you I'd always come. Charlotte watched them from the gallery, tears streaming down her face. Boudreaux put a hand on her shoulder. You did good, Mama Bear. We all did. She wiped her eyes. But it's not over. She's still sick. He's still going to need people. Then we'll be people. Boudreaux squeezed her shoulder. That's what we do. In the front of the courtroom, Marcus pulled back from his grandmother and looked at her with those wide, serious eyes. Mère, can we go home now? Yes, baby. Odette smiled, exhausted and grateful and alive. Let's go home. Charlotte walked over and crouched beside the wheelchair. The Brotherhood's going to escort you, if that's okay. Marcus's face lit up. A real escort? With all the motorcycles? All of them, little man, every single one. He threw his arms around Charlotte's neck, and she held him the way she'd wanted to hold her grandson one more time, the way she'd never gotten to. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for coming back. Always, she said. I promise. Always. Outside, 23 motorcycles waited in the courthouse parking lot, the original 12-plus reinforcements who'd heard about the hearing and made the drive. They formed up around Odette's borrowed medical transport van, engines rumbling like thunder rolling in from the Gulf. And in the back seat, Marcus pressed his face to the window and waved at every single one. 8 months later, spring had softened the bayou, and the shotgun house on Cypress Road looked like it belonged to someone who was loved. The porch didn't sag anymore. Boudreaux and a crew of Brotherhood volunteers had replaced the boards in February, working through a weekend while Marcus handed them nails and Odette supervised from a new rocking chair that Charlotte had found at an estate sale in Houma. The water heater was new too, a donation from a plumber in the club who'd heard the story and decided rust-colored water wasn't something any kid should have to get used to. The for sale sign was long gone. In its place, a hand-painted wooden marker that Marcus had made in art class. Welcome to the Dubois house. Please wave. Odette sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, watching her grandson chase fireflies in the early evening light. Her heart was still. Tired. Would always be tired, the doctor said, but it beat steadier now. The pills helped. The support network helped more. Charlotte came by 3 times a week, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with casseroles from the Brotherhood's monthly potluck, sometimes just to sit and talk, while Marcus showed her his latest drawings. He drew a lot of motorcycles these days, motorcycles and waves. Mère! Marcus ran up to the porch, a mason jar clutched in his hands. I caught 6. That's more than last time. Let me see, baby. He held up the jar, and inside, 6 fireflies blinked their tiny lights against the glass. Odette remembered catching fireflies with Marlene 40 years ago in this same yard. She remembered the way Marlene's face had glowed, the way she'd believed the lights were magic. She'd lost Marlene. She'd almost lost Marcus, too. But sometimes the road came back to you. You going to keep them? She asked. Marcus thought about it, his face serious. No, I'll let them go before bed. They probably have families waiting for them. Odette's chest ached in the good the way that meant her heart was still capable of feeling more than just tired. That's real thoughtful, little man. The sound of engines drifted over the cypress trees, and Marcus's head snapped up like a hunting dog, catching a scent. They're coming! He set the jar carefully on the porch railing and ran to his spot by the road, one hand already raised. The toy motorcycle, Thunder, was in his other hand, worn smooth now from 8 months of waiting and waving and believing that good things came back if you held on long enough. The convoy appeared around the bend. 12 bikes, same as always, chrome catching the last of the daylight. Charlotte was at the front, her silver hair streaming behind her, the memorial patch for her grandson visible on her chest. She'd added a new patch beside it, a small one, hand-embroidered, a stick-figure boy waving at a row of motorcycles. The convoy slowed as it passed, slower than before, slow enough that every rider could see Marcus clearly. And this time, they didn't just smile. They waved back, every single one of them raising a hand in salute to a 7-year-old boy who'd taught them something about what it meant to keep showing up. Marcus waved so hard his whole body shook, just like the first time, and the riders honked their horns and revved their engines until the bayou rang with thunder. Then they turned into the driveway, same as they did every Tuesday, and Charlotte dismounted and walked to where Marcus was bouncing on his heels. Caught any fireflies today? 6. Want to see? In a minute. She crouched down to his level. First, I have something for you. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a small box, wrapped in paper covered with little motorcycles. Marcus's eyes went wide. What is it? Open it and see. He tore through the paper with the focused intensity of a child who'd learned not to take gifts for granted. Inside the box, nestled in tissue paper, was a toy motorcycle. Red, shiny, brand new. This was my grandson's favorite color, Charlotte said softly. He had one just like it. I thought maybe Thunder could use a friend. Marcus stared at the red motorcycle, then at Charlotte, then at Thunder in his other hand. His lower lip trembled. What was his name? Your grandson? Eli. Charlotte's voice caught. His name was Eli. Then that's what I'll call this one. Marcus held up the red motorcycle. Eli and Thunder. They can ride together. He threw his arms around Charlotte's neck, and she held him the way she'd held Eli, the way she'd wanted to hold him one more time, the way she finally understood she could, not by going back, but by going forward. Thank you, she whispered into his hair. Thank you for waving. On the porch, Odette wiped her eyes and raised her glass of sweet tea in a silent toast. The other riders gathered in the yard, accepting hugs from Marcus and updates from Odette, and settling into the easy rhythm of people who'd become family without meaning to. Curtis had completed his counseling program in April. He'd sent a letter, not asking for forgiveness, just explaining. The debt was paid off through a bankruptcy settlement. He was working at a warehouse in Houston, living in a sober house, trying to become someone his mother wouldn't be ashamed of. He hadn't asked to see Marcus. Odette thought maybe that was the most loving thing he'd done in years. The fireflies blinked in the mason jar. The sun sank below the tree line, and in the yard of a shotgun house on Cypress Road, a little boy introduced his new toy motorcycle to his old one, making engine sounds with his mouth while a silver-haired woman watched with tears in her eyes. Some waves you couldn't return in time, but some waves, if you were brave enough to keep making them, brought the whole world back to you. Marcus looked up from his toys and caught Charlotte watching him. Mama Bear? It was the name he'd started calling her in March, and she'd never corrected him. You okay? Yeah, little man. She smiled through the tears. I'm okay. Good. He held up Thunder and Eli. Because I want to show you something. Watch. They're going to do a convoy, just like you guys. He lined up the motorcycles on the porch railing, making rumbling sounds, narrating an adventure that involved dragons and bayous and a grandmother who needed rescuing. Charlotte sat beside Odette and watched him play, and somewhere in the distance a heron called out over the water. The road went on. The waves kept coming, and every Tuesday, without fail, the thunder came back. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of ordinary people who become family. And tell us in the comments, who came back for you when you needed it most?